Hey everybody! In this video, I want to show my students how to make a journal. And we got this far in the class. We didn't get to finish, so I thought I'd make a video. We did a cover, they did the inside of it, and so I'm going to show you how to do that. I made a demo before, but you won't need to have all of the embellishments that I have in this. I kind of got carried away with how I normally do it, but we're just gonna make a basic journal with a fabric cover, hardcover that's gonna be durable. So first we start out with pieces of chipboard, and this was from an old book cover, but if there are other places that you can get board at a craft store, and you try to make sure that they're even, whatever size you want to make the journal, that the two pieces are the same size. Then you have the spine. This I think is just about 1.5 inches, and what you do is you make sure that it is this far away, just to have a small groove in between the spine and the cover. You just want to make sure it's flexible when the book opens, so that's why you do that. I'm using duct tape here, and many times I've used book binding tape, but duct tape is fine, it's easy on hand. And the way that I do it is, if it's not like maybe 3 inches wide, you have to do it one side at a time, and you make it a little bit longer, so you let it extend beyond the bottom of the book, so that when you turn it over, you can continue. And if it doesn't go all the way, no problem, you can always put some more tape on it, because really what you want is to ensure that it stays, and you just use your finger to make that groove, and then you do the other side. Just ensure that it's the same distance. If it's a little bit off, it's not a big deal, but it is imperative that it's not super wide, because you want your book to have the same width. Yes, just make sure that you can see that groove, because you want it to be able to close and open easily. Like what I was saying, you're not going to see the inside, so you can put some tape over it. Don't worry about how kind of raggedy it looks, because it's going to be covered in the end. You just want to make sure that your spine is covered. And there you have it. You already have the shape of a cover. I use fabric, but there are lots of different ways. I thought fabric would be an easy way to do this. You could use paper, collages, all kinds of things on the cover. But I thought fabric would be a great way, because it's gonna keep your book looking interesting, and it's also durable. So what we're striving to do is to have the fabric be basically 1 inch, or at least 1 inch, but I've gone about 2 inches around, because you want to be able to cover it with ease. So I'm just making sure that the space around the book is not too big. So about 2 inches all the way around is, I think, a good enough size. And I'm using Fabri-Tac glue. You can use Elmer's glue because some Elmer's glue, especially the strong formula, can take fabric on, chipboard, cardboard, that kind of stuff. But I found this particular glue to be very, very good. It's more expensive than Elmer's glue, but I use it on all of my fabric covered projects, especially when I am using any of the scraps, because I did use a lot of the scraps from my class session and I just put it in one of my journals because, it's a good way to conserve. So you just make sure you cover all of the cover with this glue. I had to make the opening bigger. All right, so that should do it. And note that I did the cover and not the fabric, because you want to make sure that, make sure that the fabric is on the inside so that the printed side is on the outside, right? And then you just smooth out any of the wrinkles. And then if you've ever wrapped any book or rewrapped a book, it's basically the same thing, where one technique is just cut diagonally at the tip, but don't go too close because you don't want to have the tip poke out. So give it a little bit of room, but just cut it diagonally at those 4 corners. All right, and here I'm gluing the fabric I'm putting the glue on the fabric instead of directly on the cover, because this way you'll control it. You'll know exactly where to glue. And I strive to do 2 sides instead of doing one side and then the top side, because that way you can control how evenly it looks, And it's just, I don't know. I guess you could do it the other way, but this is how I've always done it, where I just glue 2 sides and then the top and the bottom, just to make sure that it's uniform and covered properly. Sometimes when I do this, I still have to end up cutting off a little piece that might overhang, but that's not a big problem. You'll be able to see. But I do think cutting it at the edges helps you in getting that look that you're achieving. So you see there are some edges that I said you definitely want to snip off, but this way it's just a little thing that you have to cut rather than if it's a lot more. And just do the same thing with the other side. All right, and there you have it. Nice cover. You're going to do the inside but we're almost there with the cover. And so yes, you need to have something to cover the inside. Sometimes I use fabric, but in class we use these tea-dyed pages because the signatures would be tea-dyed pages and you wanted that kind of continuity. And I just cut it down because a lot of the covers were different sizes, and so you just had to make sure that the inside covers there was no overhang. And if you want to know how to tea-dye paper, I do have a video showing that I link in the video. Just wanted to make sure it was precise because I tend to make these lean lines. I don't know. So here I'm using glue, the glue stick, because it's paper and it's going to be on board. And so toward the end, I end up using some of the fabric glue at the edges that connect with the fabric, but I use this all-purpose Elmer's glue stick because it's paper and I'm going to connect it to the board directly, and I find it works really well. Just have to make sure that you cover it completely with glue. And just smooth out any of those wrinkles. And what I found too is that some students were having trouble when they got to this stage. I decided against using the ruler because the paper is very brittle. So just use your finger to make that groove clearer because you want to make sure that it is connected completely. I do use the glue on the edges, but then in the end, especially that troublesome section that kept bubbling up, I use the fabric glue because you are going to connect it to the fabric and it seemed to work better that way. And so this part you could just use fabric glue, but I would recommend not to use it all the way through because you can see all of those lines of liquid glue. So I try not to use liquid glue on the paper side when you're connecting it to the board, but those parts that connect to the fabric, I think it's fine for you to use the fabric glue because it bonds it more and it won't show that much. That was a little troublesome section at the top, so you just have to be a little patient sometimes and just make sure that it's covered completely, because if it keeps buckling up, it's going to be a problem when you start to sew your signatures in. And so the next step is to make those lines that you're going to show the sewing, so you know exactly where, and that's what we're going to put in there. Now, what I'm ensuring is that when you draw your lines, you draw it away from the groove, not inside the groove. And in the end, I do make it a little bit closer to the middle because I thought that was a little bit too close to the groove, and so when you're sewing, you might slip, the needle might slip out, and so I said, let me make the line a little bit more toward the middle. And because I'm only going to sew in 2 folded sheets of paper, I do 2 lines. So 2 signatures, 2 lines. If you're going to have 3 sets, you do 3 lines. And so you mark the top of each line, the bottom of each line, and find the middle. You can have more signatures, but we're just going to have these 2 I have an awl, but if you don't have a tool like that, you can use a thumbtack, which was how I used to do it before I got this awl. And one of my friends gave me, but you can get it at any craft store. So you're just making holes where you've made those marks. And the thing is that with the thumbtack, you're going to have to do it more than once because you want the hole to be bigger. Because the craft needle that you'll use is bigger than normal needles. But just go ahead, make those holes and make sure that it goes all the way to the other side. So as I said, you're going to have to do it at least several times if you don't have that tool. But if you're into bookmaking, it's a great investment to get an awl. Then I'm sure you can get some on Amazon because it's thick. And you would just need one use of it for each hole and you'd have the size that you need. But if you don't, because if just to demonstrate, just using the awl once, you see you have a big enough hole. Just be careful when using it. And so now that you have your holes ready, it's time to sew in the signatures. And so I use a craft needle, which has, a very sharp point and it has a large eye and it's thicker than most needles, and wax thread. And I found that wax thread is a lot more durable than if you use embroidery thread or craft thread. And you don't knot it, you just put it through and make sure it has a little tail, because you're not going to double it. It's just going to be that one side. And we used these tea-dyed paper in class, but for each signature or each grouping of pages, I tried to add some more to it because that might be a bit thin for the book. So what you'll see is that I go and I bring some more paper. And another thing too, this you can see in my other videos, I use lots of different types of paper. Many times I use like book sheets, ruled pages, I repurpose junk mail, so that when I get to that page I may use it for putting photos or collaging or mixed media. But for writing, I tend to just use a lot of tea-dyed paper and ruled paper, which is what we did. We might have some pattern paper like with this just for interest. So I only had one in this book. I just grabbed what I had nearby. And so, mostly it's going to be writing, because that's why I wanted to show my students how to make this, is that they can write their ideas for poems, short stories, essays, and so they just need a lot of space to write. And so I didn't have a lot of different type of paper. I did use this ruled page, just to show that all the pages don't have to be the same size if you don't want it to. But the outer part needs to be, because there's going to be some overhang here, and so I just cut that down. You just make sure that it fits inside the cover. I take out some of the pages just so that when I'm using my trimmer, it's easier to work with. But I'll put them back once I cut them down to the same size. And if you don't have a trimmer, just use your scissors, which I end up doing anyway. You may not need to do this for every time because sometimes you cut your book and it's the basic A5 size, which is sort of a half of a letter size. But because we were doing different sizes, many students had to cut down their pages. All right, so the next step is to make the signature align with that stitching line that you created. So you just mark those 3 parts where you're going to make holes in your signature. So you open it out and you use your thumbtack or your awl to make these holes. I would recommend that you look when you're doing it because I made an error here. And I kept it in because I wanted to show you that sometimes these things happen. So it might be useful if you do it from the inside because that's where you're going to start sewing anyway. But just look because you've made the mark on the back side. And so you can just make sure that when you're making that incision with your thumbtack or your awl, that you make that clear. And I had to secure it too because if you have paper clips, go ahead and use that because you want to make sure that it's in the correct place. And if the pages keep shifting, then that's going to be issues. So there we have our 3 holes and we're ready to sew the signatures. And what I strive to do, I always make sure it's in the right direction because more than once I've sewn mine upside down because I didn't double check. That's if you have pattern paper. If it's see-dyed paper, it doesn't matter. But unless you haven't evenly made it. So I make this first incision in the middle. So you start the sewing from the middle. You leave a little tail about that long, and then you go down on the outside. What you can do is, because I had to make it wider because that was a side that I did with the thumbtack, so it wasn't very clear, so I just made it clearer with my needle. And it's good too to do it through the spine first and then find where it is in the signature. Yeah, just remember to keep that tail because it's going to come in handy in the end. Don't let it go away. And there we've made our first stitch. So this part can get a little tricky because you're going to go through the same hole that you made in the beginning, but just be careful not to snag the thread. Usually it's easier to do it with wax thread. You don't really snag wax thread that much, but it can happen, so just be mindful of that. And just look at each stage so you know where you're sewing. All right. What you can do is hold on to that tail while you're pulling through so that you don't accidentally pull it all the way through. And so this is what it should look like right now, where we have a stitch on each side. We're going to continue down to the bottom, put it through the spine, then find the hole and pull it through. And make sure it's taut because you don't want your stitch to be loose, right? Then the final step of the stitch is to put it underneath, pull it taut again, and then tie it twice. Then you cut off this much. And there you have it. You've sewn in your signature. So you just do the same thing with the next signature. So here we have it. We have our signatures, our pages in, and this is basic and this is fine. You just want to get down your thoughts, you just want to start working on your poems or your short stories. This is basically all you need. But sometimes I would add stuff to it to embellish it, you know, like I would put those edges on it, you know, like in gold, just as an adornment, but also to protect the corners. If you don't have any of that, it's fine. This was what I did in the sample, where I put some eyelets as well for ribbons, for closures, but and put stuff on the cover. You don't really need that. You basically just needed somewhere to write, and this does the job. And if you wanted to add more signatures, you could. There is some space in the spine that you could add another signature. So there's that option you can do later on. But sometimes what I do is I can make a pocket by folding over a previous page. I'll just show you really quickly. You could just use glue. I have some double-sided tape. And so you fold that over. And then you're just going to glue the sides. And I'll just show you with glue in case that's what you have. And so you just glue the sides. Maybe I was thinking that I should glue this down since there's so much space. Usually there isn't that much space, but since there's so much space on the spine, I said let me glue down the middle. Just so that if you put stuff in it, it won't get, lost in the bottom. And you could still sew in another signature if you want. And there you have a pocket. Just cutting off the edge, the overhang. And there you have it. Sometimes you can do a back pocket if you want. That's, just do the same thing for the back pocket. The other thing that I like to do so it has a nice finish is to round the edges. And I got this tool at Hobby Lobby for like $6, but it's not necessary. It's just another way for you to finish up your book. And yeah, if you want to, have a closure, you could use some ribbon if you don't punch any holes or, so hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that it was useful to you, and I hope it made bookmaking an interesting thing for you to try. If you are a beginner, I hope that this was straightforward enough and that you will enjoy making your own.